Max was never sure when the problems had started to arise. John had sent his bank statements at the end of May and was assured that his friend would look at the charity income and spending and would complete the returns. John had trusted him to do this and didn't think any more of it. The following weeks were spent enjoying the weather and welcoming whoever wanted to come to Moorstraat whenever they wanted. There was also a few receptions in Brussels that both John and Max found themselves attending. John wasn't sure and Max wasn't sure when the problem started, but it was sometime during the summer months. Kurt and Max had just returned from work and were standing in the kitchen chatting. John came into the room carrying a piece of paper and slammed it down angrily on the kitchen table. "Have you seen this?" he said. Kurt picked up the piece of paper and looked at it. "What is it?" he asked. "It's an email I just received from one of the choir members," he says, still angry. He moved quickly to the fridge and grabbed a can of beer from inside. He snapped the can open and took a long drink. Kurt passed the email over to Max, who read it standing at the kitchen table. "Who is it from?" Max asked quickly, reading through it. "The email is from that bastard Adam Huxley," he said. "Read it. Adam Huxley is that journalist in the choir. It has nothing to do with him. I sent it to another person who's an accountant. How the hell did he get this information?" Max read through the email. "This is crazy," he said. John didn't reply. "It says here that you have stolen from the charity. What the hell is that all about?" He handed the letter back to Kurt. "He says that I have stolen money from the charity. He says that he has proof," said John, almost spitting out his beer. "That's crazy," said Kurt, holding the email in front of him. "I know," said John, once again taking a long drink of beer. "That bastard sent the email to everyone in the choir. Everyone!" "Why should he do a thing like that? Did he talk to you about it?" asked Kurt. "No, no one has. He just sent out the email." "I'm furious," said John, snatching back the email. "I'll tell that bastard to fuck off." "Yes, John," said Max. "But John, you can't steal from your own charity," said Max, trying to calm him down. "It's your charity. It's your signature on the registration. It's up to you what you spend the money on." "I know," replied John with his eyes wide open with anger. "It's a local amateur choir. You can't make that much money. Anyway, it's not like you're a CEO of a multinational company worth millions," explained Max. "I know," repeated John again, not sure what else he could say. "It's easy," said Kurt finally. "Just tell him to fuck off." "I will," said John, and disappeared back to the spare bedroom, ready to send out his own email. In the following weeks, John became more and more involved in an argument with his choir member who had sent the email. This Adam Huxley was a middle-aged journalist in Brussels and had been a long-time member of the choir. Both Max and Kurt knew him, but not very well. He was always there at rehearsals and was quite a decent singer. Personally, he was loud and opinionated. Neither Max nor Kurt particularly liked him, but he was okay to talk to. It became clear to John that it had been this person he had sent the charity's bank accounts to who had started the rumour. He had seen the expenses in the accounts that he didn't understand. There were no receipts for these costs. Some were for the local supermarket, some were for car fuel. There were also some cash withdrawals. Instead of asking John about these costs, he had talked to this Adam Huxley about this, who just happened to be a personal friend. Although at that time there was no suggestion of theft from the charity, Huxley, this journalist, has seen this as an opportunity, a scoop, a story that could possibly make his name, the story that would quickly spread around the expat community, and he would be hailed as a hero for uncovering this story. This was Mac's interpretation of events, as John had explained what he had been discussing with the other choir members. Although some of his close friends in the group didn't believe any of this, there were others who were not so sure, especially when this Huxley was telling everyone that he had proof. Both Max and Kurt were in disbelief. Okay, so John occasionally took money out to pay for a lunch or a round of drinks, but where was the crime in that? He paid fuel for his car. So what? John had demanded that the charity accounts were returned to him. It was important that someone else looked at the cost and tried to make any sense out of it. John wasn't just very good at keeping receipts, and so would have to rely on his memory. Max offered to look through these bank accounts and try to make sense of all this. This Huxley, though, had continued to send out emails to the complete choir, pushing his story about John's theft. He was even reveling in his newfound fame. For John, this was devastating. He was seeing his reputation being destroyed before his very eyes, and there was nothing he could do about it. This was libelous. He would need to talk to a lawyer about this. First, though, he would need to prove that he wasn't a thief, that the money he had taken out of the account was reasonable. Okay, perhaps some people wouldn't agree with him, but there was a vast difference between not agreeing with his choices and accusing him of theft. To Huxley, it appeared that the story was more interesting to him than the facts. He was a journalist after all. This could make his name around the expat community in Brussels. John reluctantly handed over the bank accounts to Max. He didn't want someone else to start accusing him, especially someone who was so close. Max had to assure him that he wasn't going to be judgmental, and if there was anything that he didn't understand, then he would come and ask him to explain it. Max wasn't an accountant, but he was able to add two figures together, and he had a calculator. More importantly, he knew John, and he knew that John wasn't a thief. The choir meant too much to him. It was his life. So perhaps he wasn't very good at keeping receipts, but this was a small amateur singing group. There were many such groups around Brussels, especially amongst the expat community, so there was no great legal requirement to be exact in the return of the accounts. There was no tax to pay, and it was just simply a social group that met every week and performed a concert twice a year. That was all it was. Max took the bank accounts and started making his way through them, page after page. There were payments to printers, for which there were concert programs. There were payments for advertising in local papers and journals. There were payments for car fuel. There were cash withdrawals, but these were generally for €50 at a time, which he guessed were the occasional lunches that John had paid for. Most common payments were weekly costs at the local supermarket. These were often €60 or €70. Not a great amount, but still could look suspicious. It looked as though John was using this charity's money for his own groceries. Max knew better, because he and Kurt had been with him when he'd been at the supermarket. The fact that the choir members expected a selection of drinks at half-time. There would be coffee and tea, soft drinks and water, also a selection of beers and wine. This had to be enough for about 100 members. The other fact that John never charged them for was this: they were simply asked to place some cash on a plate to cover the cost. Most of the members didn't do this, expecting the refreshments to be free. This Huxley was one of those who would quite happily drink 1 or 2 beers during the break without ever paying for them. John had never questioned this, but this generosity was quite expensive. Not only greatly expensive, but John did have to go to the supermarket regularly simply to make sure that there were enough drinks available to keep the choir members happy. It was these payments to the supermarket that Huxley had highlighted to prove that John was using the charity's money to pay for his own lifestyle, even though he was one of the people who was responsible for these costs. To Max, John's only crime was that he hadn't kept receipts to prove that what he'd spent the money on. But that wasn't surprising. John's passion for the choir and the music, the charity accounts had never concerned him. This was why he had passed the bank accounts to someone else to do the adding up. He didn't have the time or the interest. John's big mistake was that he trusted someone who had betrayed him, and now there was nothing he could do about it. For Max, John had nothing to justify. He was being attacked without any real reason. Where was this money that he was supposed to have stolen? So he'd been careless with his accounts. But not everyone is a trained accountant or a tax advisor. Everything that Max had seen from the bank accounts was explainable. John was relieved when he was told this, but it didn't really change the situation. Huxley had opened libelly, and he was determined. And as far as John could see, there was nothing he could do but go to a lawyer and take legal action against this journalist. Max found a local lawyer and explained the situation to her. There was very little that she could do about it under the law without spending large amounts of money to take this case to court. It was a civil action, and under Belgian law, very few of these cases were proven. He would have to prove that he was totally innocent and the emails were a lie. Unless John could completely prove his innocence and that some damage had been done to him by the emails, then there was very little the law could do. All the lawyer could suggest was that he could send an official letter to this Huxley telling him to stop sending out these emails. This was a service that John would have to pay for. John agreed to this, and the lawyer sent the letter. But Huxley was a journalist, and although he received the letter, he had seen it as a joke, and it made him more determined to blacken John's name. He was clearly enjoying this, had shown a truly vindictive nature. This had gone past a simple story, and now Huxley appeared to be set out to destroy John's reputation totally. His other motivation also came in a later email that was circulated around the choir members. He, Adam Huxley, was now prepared to start a new choir under his own name, and that he would now produce their annual concerts. For Max, this was clear and obvious. The motivation had always been jealousy of John. This middle-aged man was jealous of John's success, and now he wanted his own success. He thought that he could do what John had done. He was mistaken. The reality of the situation came when John had arranged the first meeting of the choir in September. He was sure that the rest of the choir would support him. After all, he had taken them to the Royal Opera House and had a very successful Easter concert. Max and Kurt went with him to the first meeting, expecting it to be as normal as it had been over the years. Unfortunately, as the start time came and went, no one had turned up. One new member had come, but seeing that the rehearsal rooms was empty, had simply left. The three of them waited in the meeting hall for over an hour, and there was nobody there. It was a strange feeling. Everything was prepared as usual for the choir members to start their first rehearsal, but there was no one. Apart from the three of them, the building was empty. After waiting for so long, they decided to leave. It was clear to them all that the damage had been done. Perhaps they had all believed about the theft, or perhaps after the exchange of angry emails, they didn't want to be part of the choir anymore. Whatever the reason, John had lost his choir. After clearing up the rehearsal rooms, the three of them headed back to Mosselstraat in silence. There was not much either of them could say. It was over. John's dream was over, and in the cold, dark autumn evening, it felt harsher. It felt that all that they had done had come to nothing. All the work that John had put into forming the choir and producing the concerts was worth nothing. The harshest thing for John was that those people who he had thought of as friends had deserted him. From the outside, people would have recognized that this had happened and would have moved on, dismissed the accusations, and started getting back to normal life. For John, he had been betrayed by the people he knew the best and he loved the most. Unrealistic, perhaps, but it was personal. For John, too personal. It bit deep into his psyche. For Max and Kurt, they were sympathetic, but at least now they would have to spend their evenings in the rehearsal hall. For John, though, it went deeper. It had been the center of his life. It had been his success. It had been the joy of his life. Now it was gone. And for John, it felt as though he had been robbed of the one thing in his life that he had really enjoyed. Something that had really meant something. Something that he was proud of, but it had all now been taken from it. It hadn't been his fault. There was no reason for it, but it was gone. He had been branded as someone who stole from a charity. It was the start of his descent.